In an era of racial tension, what should the Christian's response be? Does the gospel specifically address the questions that we're facing today, or is it a matter of discernment? How should white people respond and be a part of reconciliation without just virtue signaling? And can we speak with one voice as Christians against rioting and on topics like white privilege, fragility, and guilt? All that and much more on today's Theology on Air. Well, as always, thanks for listening to Theology on Air. This is a ministry of Theology on Tap Houston, which is a gathering every couple of months of folks around craft beer and theological conversation. And this is our weekly radio show / podcast called Theology on Air. So we're so glad that you could join us. If you're listening through the airwaves at KPFT, we want to thank you for that as well. KPFT is all about non-commercial radio programming that seeks to build community and foster reconciliation. So that's what we're trying to do today. Go to kpft.org to learn more, because KPFT is community-sponsored, listener-supported radio. We couldn't do it without the contributions of folks like you. So basically go to kpft.org, learn how you can donate more. KPFT is part of the Pacifica Radio Network, which has several radio stations all over America. But if you're interested in conversations that commercial radio won't have, or frankly, maybe Christian radio won't have either, because most of the playlist of the contemporary Christian music is what's going on those airwaves, this is your place. We have those conversations through KPFT. Of course, we're meeting right now via Zoom, so we're doing all kinds of different things that we haven't done before, thanks to the technology that is Zoom. And so today we're going to be having a conversation to try to reflect on all of the events of the last few weeks in America, which really have taken precedence of our sort of hearts and minds and attention. And so I'm Evan McClanahan. I'm the pastor at First Lutheran here in Houston. I'm joined as always by, mostly always with by Sarah Stone, who's the outreach coordinator at Memorial Drive Presbyterian Church. And we have two very special guests with us today, Anthony Lane and Curt Allen, who we hope, once I'm done, are going to be doing most of the talking. Anthony Lane is the Senior High Outreach Director at Memorial Drive Presbyterian Church. And I'm told he is a fantastic baker. So if you need any delicious bread or sweets, he'll, I'm sure, tell us how you can get those. And then Curt Allen is a podcaster, musician, photographer, and lead pastor of Solid Rock just out of Washington, D.C. And so, Sarah, why don't you just introduce our guests a little more, or say why you kind of wanted to have this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, this is just the pressing thing right now, and I think a lot of people don't know how to even start to approach it. I thought about Anthony because he posted something, I'm sure he'll tell us more about, where he basically said, you're going to kind of say a lot of things right and wrong, and there needs to be space to do that as we have these conversations. And Curt is I put the plea out to some people that I trust, and he sometimes guest preaches at my sister's church up in the DC area. So I don't know Curt personally, but I'm excited to have a couple different voices on here. So I think probably how we should start this is just let you guys tell us a little bit about, I'm going to ask Anthony for you to start, I don't know why, maybe alphabetically. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then if you feel comfortable, how, maybe just a couple stories of how racism has made its way into your life and what that's been like for you, and then we'll continue on.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Anthony. I'm from St. Rose, Louisiana. People usually don't know where that is. So then I tell them Destrehan. They don't know where that is. So then I just say New Orleans. So from New Orleans, Louisiana, about 28. So I'm nowhere saying I have a bunch of wisdom on this topic, but I can just give my 28 years of experience on it. And like y'all said, I am an avid baker. I have a business called Lane and Simple. I do wedding cakes, catering, all that kind of stuff. And so I guess to open it up, I can share some stories and things about how racism has reared its ugly head in my own life. I guess as a kid, I recognized some things were off about society, even at a young age of observing the world. But I think when I really started to get slapped in the face of having darker skin is a little bit of an issue was my time at LSU. Actually, I decided to rush fraternity. And that's when it was just blatant that that's not a thing that African Americans do, especially at a deep South school like Louisiana State. And so like my first experience going through Rush there, like just flat out hearing guys say like, no, we don't take people of color, or even after getting into my predominantly white fraternity, like even sitting in like Rush meetings, hearing like people say things like, we don't want another minority because it like makes us look bad to the sororities and XYZ. So that's just like some things there at LSU. But then also I remember like hanging out with a group of my white friends. We were walking through Tigerland one day, and everyone like sat their cups down before going into another venue, and like I sat my cup down, but then a cop just came out of nowhere, like grabbed me, put me on the car, started reading me my Miranda rights. All my like white friends are like looking around just like, what just happened? Like, what's going on? I'm crying because I've never have been touched by an officer at that time, especially like getting Miranda rights, and everyone's just like, what did he do? What did he do? I'm like, what did I do? And come to find out, he was just like, you understand that littering is a $500 fine, right? And so it was littering, even though everyone littered. So that happened. But then a story in particular that I shared on Instagram, I posted a video just in the midst of everything going on. And I just finally wanted to speak up and like share some things, because even I was sitting quiet on it for a while, because I feel like I hold a perspective that not everyone even agrees with as a person of color, which is okay. But I believe it's the gospel response to it. And so there was an opportunity about 2 years ago. Some guys in my life at LSU who discipled me, they recommended me. I was already in Houston doing middle school and high school ministry with Camp Ozark, which is a Christian summer camp. And so they recommended me to a church, and it was a Presbyterian church. And so I did the initial phone interview. The phone interview went absolutely great. Like me and the guy immediately hit it off, because come to find out, he actually graduated from LSU as well. And so we were just hitting it off on the phone. He was excited. I was super excited about it. And he was just like, we're moving forward in this process. We're going to get the senior pastor on the call, and we're going to see what happens. So they were looking for a new youth director, because they were revitalizing their youth ministry at this church. And so I felt down for the task. And the next day I got the phone call, thinking like it was going to be him and the senior pastor. But I got the phone call, and the guy was just basically like, hey man, like, yeah, I looked you up on Facebook last night, and I was shocked, because I'm just like, whoa, Anthony's a black guy. And I was just like, yes, I am. I am a black guy. And he was just like, shoot, man, well, hey, I talked to the senior pastor about this, like after we found it out, and he was just like, I don't think we're ready for that. I don't think our congregation's ready for that. And he was just like, and I know they're not, because I've had people sit in my car and straight up tell me that
Jeez.
racist. And we just don't think that's in the best interest of you and our congregation to move forward with this. So we're going to have to like go another route. And the whole time I'm like on the phone, just like, whoa, what's going on? I was like, okay, well, thank you so much for your time, and just hung up the phone. Of course, I hate to admit this part of it, but like, of course I cried, because I was just like, whoa, this like.
Why would you hate to admit that?
I don't know, because I never like, because like even with sharing this story was like a vulnerable thing for me, because it's like I never want people to think I'm like asking for pity or like playing victim or anything like that. But it was just something like really hurtful, especially happening in 2018. Because it just like reinforced the fact, and this is something that has been all my life. It's like people will hear the way that I sound over the phone and then are very shocked when they meet me in person. And so it just like reinforced this whole thing of like what like stereotypes and what people think and XYZ. So that just like that really sucked to hear, because it also sucked because I have walked into contexts for the majority of my life where I'm the only person that looks like me, but I have viewed that as a sense of calling from God. And so I wasn't concerned about going to a church that was predominantly white, regardless if people were racist or not. Like, to me, that was the fact of that showed that no, maybe your church is like, they do need this.
They do, yeah.
To be the person to step into this context. So that's why it like really slapped me in the face as well.
It's like disappointment on top of the racism. I'm so sorry, friend.
Oh no, yeah. And so that's just a few. Of course, I can go on and on and on, but I'm not going to do that. But those are just a few.
No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you sharing it. Again, I mean, I know that's going to be hard on multiple levels. Curt, I want to give you a chance to tell us a little bit about you and some of your story.
So I just want to add that I'm also a plus size model on the weekends. So you can find some of my work online, Google my name.
Okay.
So I'm just going to share one story because I think there's much more to talk about and I think so many people are sharing stories, and I think I can identify a lot of what in different ways of what Anthony was saying. So I'm just going to share one story because I think so many stories are out there, and I think people either they use them as weapons, either to attack or to justify things. So I'll just share one story. In 2010, I was invited to speak at a camp, a youth camp for a week. The guy who was a pastor that I had done some work with in DC had moved to South Carolina, and he was I guess he was kind of executive pastor at this church down there. And so I was invited. It took 2 other guys with me from my church, 3 other guys. We did this thing for a couple of days, for a week, and they wanted me to preach on Sunday. So I got to the church, and normally when I'm asked to, I get asked to travel and speak at conferences and preach at churches. And so they said, let's go, in the pastor's office and pray before church, which is pretty standard. So, we all gathered together and we bowed our heads to pray. And the lead pastor, whom I had just met, that was my first time meeting him, he just prayed, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, Father, I just thank you for our brother Curt being here. And I just pray that no one would be offended that a black man is preaching in the pulpit. And I pray that you would not have people get up and walk out. And we were praying and our eyes were closed like this. And when he said that, I was like, I looked up, I was like, man, what type of situation am I getting into, So I was like, hold on, man. So I was like, all right, I'm going to pray. And then afterwards I said, hey, is everything cool? And they was like, yeah, man, it's just, it's just, how it is. And I said, yeah, but y'all ain't tell me I know how it is, but I also know how to drive. I can leave. I'm not trying to preach. I'm not trying to preach and then have people waiting for me outside, right? Yeah. So I preached, and then I did it, and then this lady came up to me, and this was one of the ladies they were worried about. And she came up to me, and she was trying to encourage. She said, you know what? She said, that is the best message I've ever heard a colored preach in my life. And the dude who was with me looked at me and I just smiled. And I said, ma'am, I got a lot of color. I joked around about it. I knew she was trying to encourage me. And then another guy who they thought was really going to get up and leave went to them and said, you need to preach messages like this colored guy here. That was it was just one of them things that was like, wow, this is 2010. And this is the state of, this is still part of the reality. And again, I don't expect, racism to be eradicated they were willing to tolerate me, but the fear was people are going to get offended because I was the first black man to preach in that church. And they thought, so again, I think these things are just, they're part of our reality. They're part of our story as America. And I think that's just, and that's what we're still facing. We're still seeing that happen today.
So you both used a phrase, and then Evan, take it away after this. I don't want to take over, but you said something about the gospel. Maybe touch a little bit about where your view, like how does the gospel intersect with this, or how should it intersect with this? What does the gospel have to say to this? Or somebody that believes in the gospel, how would they then take this in and deal with it? Like, what's kind of the answer there? Who wants to tackle that first?
You want me to go first, Anthony?
Yeah, you can go first, Curt.
I mean, that's a big question,
Mm-hmm.
because for me, it's a deeper problem. So I'm a firm believer that history has consequences and community has consequences, and every one of us are a product of our histories and and our community, and you can't escape that. Like, no matter what, like, you can't escape the fact that history has consequences and we're products of history. So even if you ask me right now, like, hey, how did it go such and such? Unless you're asking me, how do you feel right now? Or what do you think right now? Everything that I communicate is historical. In fact, if we're Christians, our primary identity is connected to history. So it's connected to Jesus ultimately, but we look to a book that's thousands of years old to remind us of who we are. We look back to an event of Jesus dying on the cross and rising from the dead that's historical. Everything is historical. In fact, in the Old Testament, when God sent prophets, one of the first things he would say is, they'd say, thus says the Lord, I, the Lord your God, who brought your forefathers out of Egypt. The first thing he reminded them is of their history, right? So we're all products of history, and we can't escape that. And history has consequences. So having said that, I think the challenge that we're facing as the church, and I don't know where everyone is theologically in terms of your framework. So I think you guys are Presbyterian, is what I'm hearing. I would also be what's called Reformed, essentially Reformed in my theology.
We all are. He's Lutheran, but he's Reformed too. Yeah.
So here's the problem, though. A lot of the way racism was allowed for in the history of the church came through Southern Presbyterians, right? So you get that theological. As a matter of fact, if you look back in history, you won't see Pentecostals and Baptists came much later. The fundamental theological framework from Cotton Mather on down through James Henley Thornwell, all the way up to Dabney in the 20th century, was all Presbyterianism, Reformed theology. And so what we've inherited was a theological understanding of the gospel, but it wasn't a biblical understanding. And let me explain what I mean. Theological is the study of God in relation to religion, in particular Christianity. The biblical way is, what does the Bible say you should do? So we can look at a lot of history. We can look at Jonathan Edwards, Jonathan Owen, George Whitefield. We can look at all these theologians, the Puritans. We can go down the list of all these people and see all this amazing theology, sinners in the hands of an angry God, and it calls the Great Awakening 1 and 2. We see all this stuff, and we pride ourselves on preaching the gospel. But the question is, how does a country that prides itself on establishing itself from Jesus, that uses the Bible, how do we find ourselves 400 years later in this situation? So when we talk about preach the gospel, you could say, well, we've been preaching the gospel for 400 years. How come no one is evaluating the fruit of the gospel preaching? And let's see where we're at. And that's not what I feel like is not what's happening. So when I think about the gospel and what the gospel is, I first have to realize that the gospel that has been preached up to this point that we've inherited has been preached accurately, but demonstrated poorly. And so what you have is a gospel that is the answer, but all it's done is create questions and division. And now we're trying to, and on top of that, because we inherited sort of a theological gospel and not a biblical one, we don't know what it means. The biblical ethic is love, right? So we didn't inherit that. So we can look back and say, oh, look at this guy's sermons. Let's read this guy's books. Let's look at his guys. But we can't look back and say, these people, this theologian demonstrated what it looks like to love your neighbor as yourself. Sound doctrine, as much as I appreciate it, is not the law of Christ. It is not the law and the prophets. Jesus said, whatever you wish others would do to you, do also to them. We don't know what that looks like, because the gospel was used as a weapon to subjugate people, and there's consequences for that. And I think what we're seeing today is people act like, and this is what puzzles me about Christians in particular, especially people who know their Bibles. Like, how do you know your Bible and expect there to be no consequences from God in this life when you use the Bible and the gospel as a weapon to subjugate people? And if we're really honest, what consequences can we say are clearly from God towards the church, those who profess to be Christians, for this happening? If you say the Civil War, okay. The fruit of that after the Civil War was the Black Codes and then Jim Crow. So they didn't get the message. So the problem is history has consequences, and all of us have inherited this history. If you're white, you've inherited a gospel presentation and a proclamation and demonstration that was largely used to subject Black people. And even though you're not racist, and even if you're not racist and your ancestors didn't own slaves, you still inherited this gospel in the way that it was proclaimed. Just like me, I'm a pastor. If I tell someone I'm a pastor, if their understanding of pastors is they're money hungry, they're pedophiles, they sleep with other men's wives, I've immediately inherited that, even though I didn't do anything to you. I've inherited that. And so it's incumbent upon me to help you see that pastors are different, that the gospel's different. And so you don't have to, I think the worst thing we could do is try to make white people think they have white privilege and that they're racist. I don't think so. But I think what you have to realize if you're white and a Christian is you've inherited a gospel that's a couple hundred years in this country. You've inherited a gospel that has been used to subjugate Black people. And now people are that's what you've inherited. In the same way I've inherited what people think about pastors. And if you're Black, you've inherited a gospel that has been used against you, that has tempted you to be bitter, to lack hope, to be angry, to feel oppressed, all of those things. And we've inherited that. And it's incumbent upon us to say, all right, how do I not allow that to define me and say, what are the fruits of the Spirit that need to happen? So when we talk about the gospel, we have to talk about it not as just the answer. Yes, we agree with that. But we have to remember the historical context in which the gospel has been preached and understand that, man, it's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as just preach the gospel, because we've been doing that for 400 years and look at the fruit.
Yeah, wow, that's a really helpful distinction. I don't think I've ever quite thought of it that way.
Well, I got it from 2 Kings 22, Josiah, they're rebuilding the temple, and Josiah, Shaphan, his secretary, is given the book of the law, Deuteronomy, by Hilkiah, the priest. Shaphan reads it, and then Josiah tears his clothes, and he says, go inquire of the Lord, because our ancestors, not us, our ancestors did not keep the words that were in this book. So he understood the present situation we're in is not just decisions we made, but our ancestors did this, and now God is displeased. And I think anyone who's a believer does not truly believe in God's word if we think God does not care about his reputation enough that you can use it to destroy people's lives and subjugate people and expect there to be no consequences at all in this life. It is unrealistic. And if we're honest, we haven't seen any real consequences happen at all. So nothing against white men, but when I hear white men say, I'm just tired of this and I'm tired of that, I don't have sympathy in that sense, because Black people have been feeling this way for hundreds of years. This is a new feeling for you, fam, and you can't handle it. Proverbs 24:10. If you fail in the face of adversity, how small is your strength? Like, this is a new narrative right now. Civil rights wasn't about white churches and white leaders. It was about legislation. Now I think God is sovereignly allowing these narratives to come to light, not because they're about Black Lives Matter, but I think God is shaming the church, right? This last thing I'll say, and I'm leaving, I promise. I got a model, I got a shoot, I got to do. No, I'm kidding. But this last thing I'll say. People will say Martin Luther King was not a Christian, right? He was wrong on the gospel. He was adulterer, all these things. They'll say all these things that make you think he's not a Christian. That may be true. And they'll use that to discredit Martin Luther King. But here's the problem. if we were actually really paying attention to God's word and seeing what that means, and what you're saying is that God had to use a non-Christian, an adulterer who was wrong on the gospel, who didn't understand the Trinity, to actually shame America and shame the people who have sound doctrine and who know good theology, to teach them how to actually apply it. So God had to use a non-Christian to teach sound doctrine Christians how to love their neighbor as themselves. And instead of criticizing him, we should be looking at us and saying, wow, Lord, our sound doctrine and all the stuff that we know didn't let us love other people.
It's quite
That's the problem.
Yeah. Anthony, I see a lot of head shaking.
Yeah.
Get after
like
it.
that like absolutely, because the echoing thing, and especially in the American church, like Curt's so right, yes, it is so easy for people to keep saying, oh, we preach the gospel, we preach the gospel. But the issue is no one's living this thing. Like no one's living by the gospel. No one's living by the radical love, by the radical forgiveness on both ends. So like if a friend says something that may have been offensive, or like Proverbs tells us, love prospers when the fault is forgiven, but dwelling on it separates close friends. So it's like, it's this radical love, it's this radical grace, it's this radical forgiveness to keep overlooking an offense for the sake of the gospel and loving people well. But that's the biggest issue that we're facing right now, is the fact that you have a lot of people claiming Christianity and claiming XYZ who has not picked up this book, or they picked up the book, but they don't live it. Like they don't live it out. And like that is the main problem, I think, with all of it. And Curt hit the other nail on the head, that if you're going to be a Christian, you have to believe in the power of, I think I remember hearing it called like generational curses. Like we pay the piper even when we don't ask for what people did in the past, still pay the piper for that. Like it's generational pass down is a thing. Like if you think of the like really popular song right now, The Blessing, it talks about bless your family and their children and their children and their children. Like that is a thing. Generational pass down is a thing. So I know this all the time. Like people are like, my ancestors didn't do XYZ. It's like, yeah, but guess what? We're all paying the consequences of a decision that was made before we were here. And I think that all stems from, like Curt was saying, it is easy to say these things and preach these things. It's easy to post something on Instagram. It's easy to do X, Y, and Z, but it's not easy to actually walk out this narrow road that Jesus has like given us. And so when I see all these things, like I have to filter it through that. Like Jesus was wrongly arrested and accused and beaten and mocked and just dragged through the mud, but left and right. Like Jesus still loved people radically to the point till his death, till the end. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. And like the same things with like the stuff of like white privilege and all that kind of stuff. Like I believe we all have forms of privilege. Like you can argue I have privilege because I'm a male. Like I know I have a form of privilege there. Like I have and then there's this whole thing you can get into colorism and like the Black community, where I grew up in the context where I was not Black enough for Black people. I was not white enough for white people. And so it was like, where am I to go except to Jesus, except to the one that points to, hey, we're heading to a revelation world of every nation, every tribe, every tongue. Like you need to get on board with that. If you don't want to get on board with that, then you're not reading the biblical
Bible
narrative by any means. And so it's like and that's the thing. I know, like for the longest time, I felt like me being Black was like God like made a mistake. But one of my friends actually wrote something that was so beautiful, and she said, like, don't let this world, like God blatantly told her, like, don't let this world convince you that I painted you this way by accident. And like same thing goes for our white brothers and sisters. It's like God didn't paint you by accident to be white. So like we all have different forms of blessing and privilege, but it's how we use all those things for the kingdom. And I think the core issue here is everything like Curt was saying. You have all these people that were proclaiming, and still to this day, proclaiming these things, but they are not living these things. On both ends, on the side of you have a community that is broken down and that is hurt, but and I know people won't agree, but we have to move past it. Like talking to my mom last night was a reminder, and we were just talking about these things, and she straight, like my grandfather's still alive. A lot of people's grandparents are still alive who were walking through civil rights and XYZ. And she was like, I have to call out your grandfather and say, hey, you got to let that go. We have to move forward. We have to move forward. Like you can't keep dwelling on that, but it's like we have to push forward. And that means like it's gonna take uncomfortable conversations. Some people are gonna get riled up, but it's in the midst of that you can't deter or like put away what Jesus said just because you're mad or pissed off or XYZ. It's like this has to be the ultimate truth and our ultimate response.
Yeah.
But I really do think the key issue here, and especially in the American church, is that it's very easy to checkbox Christian, but it's not easy to live this thing out.
Preach. You both said something about understanding the gospel, but not living the gospel. So in relation to the race conversation, then what does that look like? Can you maybe just give some actual concrete examples? Like, I'm not looking for phrases to say or not say, but what does it look like to live out the real gospel, keeping in mind the history that's been handed down, for better or for worse? What does that actually look like? And I promise that's my last question, Evan. I know I said the last one was, but that really
I would say I think we do overcomplicate it a lot of the times. Like in one of my favorite stories, it's like in John, someone asks, well, what must we do to do the works that God requires? And Jesus is like, the work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent. It's like, first of all, step one, it's repentance first between you and God. Like you can't reconcile to another person if you haven't even truly reconciled to God. And I think like really letting the gospel penetrate yourself, because this is something that a lot of Christians don't like to hear, is that, hey, black, white, green, Asian, yellow, don't care, not a good person. Like only God is good. We are all broken. We're all sinful in some way. And in my context where I work, I know that's hard for people to hear, that they don't have it all together, that they are broken. And so people have got to reconcile that part first. And then the other part of that really is loving others. So I guess a concrete way for that, it's overlooking the offense. Okay, so you have a white friend who says something that you don't fully agree with, or you think their view may be off. It's not blowing up at them. It's not using, like Curt said, like a lot of these times these stories can be used as weapons of like what you've gone through. But it's like, no, it is having a gentle conversation. It's trying to love people well and like give space for people to mess up. Like James says, like the tongue, like none of us are perfect when it comes to the tongue. We all stumble in many ways in what we say. So I don't know. I think it really is loving people, and before like completely painting everyone as a brushstroke of this or a brushstroke of that, we have got to give people the space. We have got to look over the offenses like the Bible says, like, because that's the only way. Like a harsh word, all that does is stir up anger, but a gentle word does not. So I really do. It's not simple, but it's loving God and reconciling to God first, and then watch how everyone else reconciles to people. And many people would argue that reconciliation isn't really even the thing here, because it's bringing back something that once was. There was never really like race peace. So this is like racial redemption. So it's almost like we need race to be completely redeemed. So Yeah, that's, I guess, concrete. I don't know if that was concrete enough, but I really do think it is. You have to radically love and you have to radically forgive. And it's like, but that is not saying you can't be angry or you can't. The Bible tells you, like, be angry, but don't sin. You have a lot of people right now angry and just sinning left and right and just tossing the teachings of Jesus because it's convenient right now. But it's like, no, even in the most trying circumstance, we have to have patience. We have to have endurance. We have to have love. We have to have forgiveness. Like, that's non-negotiable in the Christian faith. But a lot of times we make it negotiable, like, oh no, I'm justified in this. But Jesus will show you, like, no, it's not justified. Like, we're literally following a man who was beaten, bruised, misunderstood, and murdered for loving people, trying to bring people back to God.
Everything you said, you kept saying, it's simple, and it is in concept.
In concept.
Doing it obviously difficult, or we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Exactly.
Kurt,
Sorry.
Want to add to this?
Well, I think he said it well. I don't want to repeat stuff that he said, so let me just give a practical step. I think a lot of the church today has to realize that this issue is not political, it's moral. And we need to understand that we see this through political lenses more than we do biblical lenses.
Yes.
And so when we see them politically, we don't have to respond biblically, because the political lens, its ethic is loyalty, but the biblical lens, its ethic is love. So let me give you a practical example of what I mean and how Christians are being duped by the political lens. And I don't mean to throw anyone under the bus, but I have to use this example. So Candace Owens has recently talked about George Floyd's character. And she said, he's not a good person. He's not a hero. Why do Black people celebrate the worst of their culture? We're the only race that does that. And we do these things. And she's bent on destroying the character of George Floyd. Now, she'll add the caveat, but I don't think he needed to die. But the rest of her 17, 18-minute rants will be attacking his character and Black people for making him a hero, so to speak, right? So when we think of that politically, here's where we go. Yep, that's the left. There it is. That's the left. That's the social justice. That's the left. That's George Soros. That's all those things. We think political. We think it's the left or whatever side you're on. If you don't agree with if you think the opposite, then you think, oh, you're just a racist, conservative. That's how you think. And we go back and forth with these things. So let's use an example from Jesus to see what he did. So John chapter 8, he's in the synagogue teaching. He gets interrupted by religious leaders and they bring this woman in there. This woman was caught in the act of adultery, clearly sinning. Now they don't know this, but they're talking to the person who actually created the Mosaic law that said that she should be stoned to death. They don't think it's him. They're trying to use his law to trick him. Now we know, right? We know who he is because we're reading the story. They don't know this. They're expecting him to do Mosaic law and kill her, and that will make people outraged and then no longer want to follow him as deployed. Now this is the God of the universe, the one person who could criticize and condemn all the time and there would never be an issue. And instead, that scene ends with him saying, he who was without sin cast the first stone. And then when everyone walks away, he says, where are your accusers? Where are your condemners? And she says, they're gone, my Lord. And he says, neither do I condemn you, right? The biblical perspective is we don't condemn people because of their sinfulness. So why is Candace Owens condemning George Floyd's criminal past, except to get people to not think, to justify to some degree what happened to him? And we fall into this because we think it's a political issue rather than a moral one. We're talking about it as a moral issue, not a political one. And if we're honest, we've also inherited that. We've inherited a theopolitical gospel. I mean, even the Pledge of Allegiance, what do we say? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God. They're all connected, and that's what we've inherited. So everything is seen through a political lens, and now we're more divided politically, and you got Christians on both sides reacting first to the politics of it instead of and that's the challenge. So I think if we're going to really apply what Anthony was saying about being loving, we have to honestly acknowledge that, you know what, Lord, I think I become more political in the way I see things, and I'm more concerned about the political thing than I am about the biblical thing. Because in all honesty, if God was truly sovereign, as we all agree theologically, if God was truly sovereign over slavery and racism, then why isn't God sovereign over these stories and these narratives also coming out? So let's not be selective with our sovereignty. If you believe that God is sovereign over all the stuff that's happened to Black people that you're saying we should get over, then keep that same energy, as we like to say, when we're talking about what's happening today. Is God not in control of the left? Is he not sovereign over the conservative right? Does God determine, does he allow, I mean, who gives counsel to the Lord? What we need to do is read Job 37 through 41 and remember who we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about a God who can do whatever he wants. So if these are the stories that he's allowing to come out, then we have to say, God is sovereignly letting this happen. What may he be trying to show us? And again, I think it's, you're not listening, church. I had to use an unbeliever in Martin Luther King to get your attention. Now I got to use an unbelieving organization like Black Lives Matter to accomplish more than you're willing to accomplish, because you're still fighting over whether it's social justice or not. It is utterly ridiculous. And it's because we see things through the political lens. So I think we need to start with, you know what? My heart has been caught up in the country that I live in and the political party that I stand with. And my identity, there are no Democrats, there are no Republicans in heaven. God is not a Republican, he's not a Democrat, he's not an evangelical, and he has not called me to make that my primary identity. And I want to commit, Lord, to giving to Caesar what is Caesar's and giving to God what is God's. That's what we have to start personally, and then we have to start communally. What's happening in my community that I can talk to?
Yeah.
What's happening there in my community, and then nationally and then internationally, should the platform be there. But I think we get most of the back and forth I have with people, it's political. Yep. It's all just the left. And it's like, brother, even if it's the left, okay, you know, if God is actually every 2 years allowing the left to promote these stories around election time, then all you're saying is that every 2 years, God is allowing these stories to come to light, which happen more consistently than you give it credit for. And he's letting him come to light so those families get justice. We're supposed to be about people who care about, imagine if Ahmaud Arbery's story didn't come to light in George Floyd's, then there would be no justice. So again, you may not, I agree with the hashtag Black Lives Matter. I don't bang with the organization. I'm not standing with them at all. They can keep that over there, because there's a lot of other things that I agree with that they don't do. So don't come at, first of all, I'm blacker than black, so they can't say nothing to me. I'm from all that. When you talk about I'm not black enough, I'm super black. I'm from all of it. Nobody's ever called me Carlton to this day or nothing. I get it. I'm from that. I've been locked up. I'm from the streets. I live that life.
Carlton, is that the guy from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air?
See, there you go.
Okay.
The guy from, so again.
Hey, that's what I know about black culture. I watch Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. No, I'm just kidding.
There you go. That's where I think is a lot of the issues. We've just gotten so political that we've forgotten we're supposed to be biblical.
Can I go back to something you said a long time ago, Curt? You know, in your opening remarks, and just to kind of try to put some theological. I mean, this is all language that you would use as well. But I was thinking as you were talking about, you know, the generally speaking, the Reformed and Lutheran traditions, right? They come out, you know, they're coming out of the Reformation. It was about the question of justification, and so the gospel then becomes about how you know that you're forgiven, and you filter that down through a couple hundred years, maybe with some well-intentioned people. But this is very much the culture in Lutheran, say, homiletics today. Lutheran theology has been for probably hundreds and hundreds of years. Preaching is essentially a comforting medium. The idea of preaching is that people come wounded by the law. You've got to preach the gospel in such a way and leave on a high note, right? So that people leave comforted. And so I think that maybe that is part of how we have knowledge of the gospel as the forgiveness of sins. But there hasn't been this fully orbed Christian worldview preaching where it says, this is how you live as a forgiven Christian. So I don't know. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but that's one thing we talked about this last week on our show, because we were talking about sort of progressive versus traditional Christianity. And part of my argument was that liberal or progressive Christianity, whatever word you can use, it can become a gospel reductionism, where it's about, this thing or whatever. But the other thing is, some who are really critical of two kingdoms theology, this is one of the reasons they're critical of it. Because two kingdoms mean kingdom of the right, kingdom of the left. Both Calvinists and Lutherans essentially affirm it theologically. And what it allowed, arguably, Christians in America to do was to basically say, well, that whole slavery thing, I'm personally opposed to it. But, kingdom of the right, or whichever one it is, that's the state doing that business. I'm personally opposed. But, the state is the one saying that slavery is fine. And we have a distinction between those things in our theology, don't you know? So it's like hiding behind theology. So sorry, didn't mean to talk so much. I'm trying not to. But I just didn't know if something like gospel reductionism, where it becomes only about comfort and the forgiveness of sins, that's a problem, because it seems like preaching should be about living the full Christian life. But we're afraid to do that because then people might think they're saved by works. And then this two kingdoms thing, which maybe we need to rethink a little bit. Again, I agree with you. Yeah, we don't want to be overtly political, but our politics are moral. So we got to somehow bridge those gaps.
So when you talk about, you said politics are amoral, like neutral?
No, I mean, they are, I don't know what I said, but they are moral in the sense that any political choice, any legal choice, has a morality behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we talk about it, I think gospel reductionism is a good way to phrase it. But I think if we think, so let's think, systematic theology, right? Theological. It's the Imago Dei, right? There was no real treatment given to Imago Dei. So
can you tell some of our listeners that don't know what that is?
Okay, so Imago Dei just means being made in the image of God, like image bearers. Like that's what's missing. So, and then again, when you have a theopolitical gospel that's dedicated to the study of God and loyalty to politics, there's not room for love, right? So politics the political side is about dismissiveness. And when you talked about the two against my opponent, like you start defining yourself by what you don't agree with. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens. And you create this dynamic, and this is what we get. You get this passed down. So, right, you could have a pastor who will preach about fornication in his church, but then make two slaves have sex with each other so she can get pregnant and then give birth and have more slaves that he can make money from. Mm-hmm. So there's this total breakdown. These are all documented realities. This isn't like stuff. And what I'm saying, people will be like, well, that was a long time ago, but it has consequences. What Anthony was talking about earlier about generational, that's biblical. I mean, that's it. You look at Exodus 34, here's God telling this to Moses. He says this, the Lord is a compassionate and gracious God. This is verses 6 and 7 of Exodus 34. Slow to anger and abounding in faithful love and truth. This is CSB translation, by the way. Maintaining faithful love to 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity, rebellion, and sin, but he will not leave the guilty unpunished, bringing the father's iniquity on the children and the grandchildren to the third and fourth generation. We make things political, and when you make them political, then you put Black people in a socioeconomic class. And so you say stuff like, what about fatherlessness in the home? Where's that at? That's what they say. I get it. You're right. The way God intended, mothers and fathers, that's the ideal situation. But here's the problem with that statement. I agree that fathers play a huge role. But here's the problem with that statement. When you say it politically and socioeconomically, you forget one thing. For that to be a true narrative, that true statement, that the fatherlessness in the home is the reason why the Black community, if that's true, then what do you say? All fathers were slave owners that were in their home for hundreds of years. There was more wickedness done by all those fathers in the home, those two-parent households, than there is in the Black community. So you can't just say that it's just the fatherlessness in the home. Well, I agree that we need that is a deterrent and a detriment to the Black community, but there's been so much evil done by fathers who were in the home who passed that evil down to their sons and essentially made Exodus 34:7 prophetic. So again, go ahead.
I just want to jump in because we're actually running out of time. It's gone by super fast. And I'm hoping we can maybe go a little bit longer on Facebook Live, maybe, because there are going to be some things we aren't going to get to. But if you're a podcast listener, find us, facebook.com/Theology on Tap Houston, we're doing this on Facebook Live, so the video will be there. We're recording it, so we'll probably upload it because I'm being told it's freezing on Facebook Live for whatever reason. So we'll actually probably upload this so there's no freezing. But anyway, because it's working well on Zoom. So, but we only have like 5-6 minutes left. So I wanted to try to just, and I'm very aware that I'm the white man asking you to not talk for a long time. So I'm trying not to do that. Okay. But
listen, the radio show's as long as it is. That's just,
yeah, it's 58 minutes. Boom. Okay. But can you give some kind of quick, maybe thoughts on, like, for example, someone wrote in and said, our church is praying for racial reconciliation tonight. Can you give us some ideas about how to focus our prayer? What would you say? Like, how should white churches be in prayer about this? That's one question. I also want to ask too about how should what should white people be doing? How should we be responding? Like, as an example, what is, and this is maybe too big of a question, but is colorblind the goal, or is that the old goal? That's not the goal anymore, right? But how do we point at it? How do we notice it? Do we just go up to a black person and say, start a conversation? Anyway, and there are some people doing that. But back to the question, maybe about prayer, but keep it quick, but some advice maybe.
Some advice I would say, like I said, it's redemption. So it's I would say focus that prayer for these situations, these generations to be redeemed, and to be rejuvenated. And I think the cry of your church should be for the Lord to convict the hearts of the members there, for members there to really search their heart and to search their theology and to search, are they living a biblical truth? And like Curt said, it's like too much of this is politicized. And one way I explain this to students that clicks with them is that, look, think of Jesus as saying that the way is narrow. Mm-hmm. So you can't be going too far right and you can't be going too far left. So you can't take these extremes. It's narrow. And so I think the prayer needs to be redemption and true conviction and heart change of the members there. Because it has to start here with the individual to really dig in, I believe. That's my tip on that.
Yeah, I would say something similar. I mean, Jesus said in Matthew 7:12, so whatever you wish others would do to you, do also to them. That's a really easy principle. The hard part about it is we just don't feel like doing it. But so it's not the issue. So I would pray, Lord, help us to treat people the way we want to be treated. And we all want to be treated with love, dignity, respect, benefit of the doubt, grace. We want those things. Start there, like, Lord, help me be a person who not only is asking that happen to me, but doing that to others. Like Jesus said, that fulfills the law and the prophets. And I think that we make it complicated in the sense that we're thinking of, should we march? Should we protest? Should we do this? And I'd say, lastly, something that Anthony alluded to with the not going too far. Listen, Facebook is not your church. And just because you're aware of what's happening and what other people are saying, you don't need to correct that and address that. And they're not, unless it's members of they're not your church. So you got to look at who the people that I'm around and what's the community that I'm building around. Who are we, let's have an honest conversation about, are we loving each other as we should? Do you feel like, how can I ask your, I mean, when you pray, but then ask your church members, hey, how can I grow in treating you the way I want to be? Let's take that and ask that question to one another, because if we don't start there, we'll be overwhelmed by what we see on Facebook and on this post and that post and this viral video and that. We'll be overwhelmed. Facebook is not your church. And so I don't think we need to think about it on that level.
It does sound like you guys very much encourage, the conversation to take place. You want people talking. I have to say, and again, people are going to say, like, I'm saying this because of white fragility, a phrase I'm learning now. But I will say it's hard to know what to say anymore. I'm not sure if I should talk or not talk. If I talk, it's, hey, you need to shut up and listen. If I don't talk, hey, your silence is the problem.
Or if I engage my Black brothers and sisters, another thing is now you're expecting them to explain things to you, and that is burdensome because they're exhausted from doing that. So then I'm like, so I guess you're supposed to seek out your woke white brothers and sisters. It's it's tricky.
Mhm.
I'm not trying to say like, oh, white people are so, having such a hard time, but I am saying what are some good ways that white people can respond in these moments?
And maybe I would say too, like, are we at a point where, and I really do think we're going to ask about Black Lives Matter. I think we need to do that on Facebook. So you're not going to get it on the podcast. You're going to have to find us there. But because I think now it feels like if we don't fully support that organization, then we're basically incipient. What's the word? I don't know. We're native white supremacists or something. That seems like a change from 5 years ago. It's happened very quickly.
So let me quickly respond to that. What you're talking about is a deeper personal issue. So we're talking about now fear of man type stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a personal issue. So the principle that I would have is Romans 12:18. So then each of you, as far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Listen, a whisper is too loud if somebody doesn't want to hear what you have to say.
Mm-hmm.
And you can only do but so much, and you're only responsible to do but so much. So for me, there are times I share my perspective, and because I don't have a political base, I can share my perspective freely. And if people like it, if they don't, I'm not offended. What I'm after is not to convince you that I'm right. I'm just saying what I think is true. If you disagree with it, cool. My goal is to live peaceably with you as far as it depends on me. I can't control what you do. And I think what we're talking about is more of a fear of man issue. So if it's like, I don't know what to say, that's a fear issue. So you do the best you can, and then you adjust as things happen. And if people get offended, then they get offended.
Anthony, come in, kind of a last word. We're going to wrap up the radio show. We'll go as long as time, maybe another 10 minutes or so on Facebook Live, but go ahead, Anthony.
No, I completely agree with Curt said there. It's like, so what? It's like we have to, and it's like it's doing the hard work. Yes, people are going to get mad. Yes, people are going to get offended. Yes, some people are going to say, listen, but that doesn't mean we stop and just shut down.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the best way. And it's like, yeah, I've had through the past 2 weeks so many conversations. Yes, it's tiring, but it's keeping that gospel lens. And like I said in my video on Instagram, it's like, I will patiently endure this if this means I can keep talking to people about Jesus and keep pointing people to the gospel perspective on it. Yeah, it is tiring, but it is what it is. And it's like, that's where we are right now. And so I never want people to just like walk on eggshells and shut down. And then in this age of social media and text messaging, it is so hard to read words on the screen in its context and the emotional pull behind it. So I would say, I would encourage people, as far as you can, try to have the conversations in person. Like, just try. Like Facebook and social media, that's an awesome medium, but it can't be the only medium. And I loved what Curt said about do what you can on your end. If the person next to you are like, shut up, and they want to get all riled up, you have to stand before God and give an account for your life. Just like they're going to have to stand before God and give an account for their unforgiveness or their this or that. So I think that's the part we forget, is that we have to answer. All we can control is ourselves. And so it's keeping that perspective of we all have to give an account one day. And if you know that you're pursuing the Lord and you're pursuing wanting to have these conversations, like I see this phrase a lot of like, oh, this person knows my heart. This person knows my heart. Actually, that's not true. Only the Lord knows your heart.
Yeah.
And so
let me jump in, because I got to bring it to an end, and I don't want to have to edit
sorry.
too much, because that means I have to cut out some of what you said. But folks, thanks for listening via radio. We'll be back next week. As always, we're going to have a part 2 of this conversation to look at maybe more systemic questions, more than maybe the interpersonal Christian theological dynamic. But for Sarah, I can say thanks for listening very much. And until next time, we want to encourage you to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed. Facebook friends, we're going to go for a few more minutes. Sorry, didn't want to cut you off. But I do want to ask about, there's so much to talk about, but I really do want to know kind of about Black Lives Matter, okay? Because now I think to lay some groundwork, we would all agree it's not a Christian organization. It's not established that way. It doesn't purport to be. Whether it's unchristian is another conversation, but it's not birthed out of the church per se.
Right.
And so the genius of the organization, though, is that no one wants to disagree with the premise that Black lives do in fact matter. I understand the offense of something like all lives matter. I also understand the logical reality of that given the Imago Dei. My concern is that the organization has grown so powerful and the posturing around it has grown so strong, even though we've just been told, watch your consumption on Facebook and such, wise advice. What are, I mean, maybe what are Black Christians as well, but what are white Christians to think of Black Lives Matter? How do we engage in an organization like that whose goals and methods we may or may not agree with? I've read their founding principles. I have a lot to disagree with. But what would you guys say, like how should I think about an organization like that as a Christian?
If I am being so completely honest, I really don't know much about, except from what I know about Black, I really don't know a lot about the organization. I just know the premise of like the hashtag of like it's saying that when someone says Black Lives Matter, that is not saying only Black Lives Matter. It's just saying that this is a people group that has been hurting. And so that's why we're focusing our attention there right now, that there's been a lot of injustice there. So it's like, no, Black Lives Matter too. Like, of course, all lives matter, but it's like, but if you're going to say that, you gotta like realize that there is a bias towards, Black lives.
And I think we're all in agreement. Like, that's not even something I would waste our time debating.
Sorry. Yeah.
If
So
anybody
yeah,
has a problem with Black Lives Matter, the phrase,
it's the organization, and that's why I said I don't know anything. Like maybe Curt, you know more, but I really don't know anything about the powerhouse that is the organization.
So I'm going to answer this question not from what white Christians should do, but all Christians should process it this way.
Yes.
You know, I think we should always care about the restraining of evil. Like, we are people who care about justice, righteousness, you know, mercy. You know, we don't want to be told like the Pharisees, you know, you tithe mint, cumin, and rue, but you neglected the weightier matters of the law. We don't want to hear that Matthew 23 judgment on us, right? I think we always celebrate the restraining of evil. And even if people who are non-believers are doing things that may restrain evil, I'm okay with that. I wouldn't have a problem if the government said we're going to defund Planned Parenthood. I wouldn't have a problem with that. They're not Christian, but that's the restraining of evil to me. So I'm sorry if you're a listener and you have a different opinion of abortion. We can agree to disagree. I think it's evil. So to me, I think I can celebrate that. The challenge with Black Lives Matter is it's an organization that is trying to eradicate racism, eradicate inequality, eradicate sin. And on the premise, it seems good, but the problem is, so let's make our theology and our reality come together. We know that's impossible.
Yep.
People of the faith know that's impossible. The Bible doesn't even call us to eradicate sin. It says, when you sin, know that you have an advocate before the Father. Sure, Jesus was sinless, so we sin less, but it's not like we're going to eradicate evil. So if you're supporting an organization that's trying to eradicate evil, then and eradicate all these different things as they define it, then once they feel like they can accomplish it, like what we're seeing now, what's the next thing they're going to go after to eradicate? Is the church, because we're not going to be into their definition of equality. We're not going to be. So I think I want to celebrate the restraint of evil in any capacity, but I cannot get behind an organization that doesn't have Christ in him. Its motivation for what it's doing is Christ. What we're seeing right now is an unprecedented faith in humanity. That's what we're seeing. This isn't faith in Christ. This is faith in humanity. And I remember what Jesus said in John 6, he wouldn't entrust himself to them because he knows what's in the heart of men. We're all reformed, so we know total depravity, right? We understand these theological premises. We need to be careful. Any Christian, I'm talking about white, Black, any Christian needs to be careful and realize that the real issue, we do not wage war against flesh and blood. This is Ephesians 6:12. This is what's going on. This isn't the political left. This isn't the conservative right. The enemy is at work. He appears as an angel of light. And right now it seems like, man, we're making progress. But at some point, because this is reconciliation without the cross. This is trying to live in the kingdom without the king. And
Ooh,
this is what
yes.
and when you support an organization that is doing that, eventually they're going to come after our king. They're going to come after our reconciliation, the way we define it. And because the church is so in disarray arguing, we're going to look like the ones who don't get it. And the reality is a lot of people are going to fall victim to that. So I can support the hashtag. I agree. I think we're living in a country where we've inherited a loveless gospel, where Black people, at the end of the day, we just feel unloved. I mean, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is millions and millions of Black people who feel they're not accepted. We don't feel accepted. We haven't been accepted. And that's all we really want. When you think about most of the diverse churches, most diverse churches that you probably know are Black people going to predominantly white churches. You don't find many white people going to predominantly white churches. So in order for a lot of churches to be diverse, Black people assimilate. We're actually far more forgiving than we get credit for. Honestly, if you want to be honest, Black Lives Matter wouldn't even exist if a few police officers had been convicted of excessive force and done some time. The reason why it existed was because it's like, hold on, man, this is happening too much. It's people that remember that, like you said, you got people that were alive during civil rights. I remember watching that Rodney King tape. The only time that it looked like Black people got over was OJ. That's why Black people celebrated with OJ, because it wasn't, I thought he was guilty, but it was the first time a Black man beat the system. Because so many Black people don't beat the system, and that's what we're living in, the consequences of that.
And the whole, if you watch the 30 for 30 on OJ Made in America, the whole narrative of that is that he, in many ways, he lived as a white person. He sought to live as a white person. He that was his choice.
Yeah.
Except when he needed it for the,
he took diction classes. He didn't want to talk Black or none of that stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, OJ from South Central. So I'm still, that was a sidebar. The real issue is with Black Lives Matter. It's an organization trying to accomplish something the Bible doesn't even tell us we can accomplish. Jesus didn't even come and eradicate sin. He just said, I'm going to save people who do sin, to create a community of people that demonstrate God's forgiveness and mercy, that will worship me, Jesus, and worship the Father for the forgiveness, because we deserve the sin. We deserve the wrath because we do sin, because we can't eradicate it. We can't eradicate it in our children. And Black Lives Matter is not going to eradicate racism from the culture. So on one level, I appreciate what seems to be a pursuit for the restraining of evil, but is a lot of foolishness. Like the Democrats kneeling down with Kente scarves on, cloths on. Do you know that those cloths are from the African tribe that is most known for selling slaves to the Americans? So you think you're standing up for righteousness and justice, and you're wearing the cloth of the African tribe that sold more Black people to America, that put us in this situation in the first place. I don't trust those folks. Those folks don't know what they.
You know what? Can I ask this too quickly? And I want to, Sarah, I think we should leave after this, because these men are entrepreneurs who need to go out and like bake and photograph and model and make.
I'm going to grill after this. I'm about to grill. This is.
But the question of kneeling, I think, is a specifically Christian question. Every knee shall bend. That's and there was a kind of viral video of like a Georgia police officer a couple days ago who said, "I don't kneel for anybody but Christ," and he was an African American police officer. And I'm curious as to what you guys think about the kneeling. Now, you've probably also seen the guy, the prankster, the Black man going around on YouTube making the white woman kneel, and that poor woman was scared out of her mind, being approached, number one, and then really having seemingly no worldview to know how to answer this person. I'm curious. I'm really curious. I see the kneeling as posturing. I think that, but maybe there are times when it's the right thing to do. Like maybe the police kneeling in front of protesters in mass is the right thing to do. There are other times where it might be idolatrous. I'm curious as to what you think as Christians specifically, given that kneeling can be a sign of worship.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a posture of worship, prostration and such. And it's a biblical word. Do y'all think it's good, bad, contextual, context matters? What?
It's so funny that you bring this up, as this morning, I think it was on Christianity Today, I saw in one of my really good friends, who powerful person of God, like posted, it was this article of a bunch of white people kneeling in front of a crowd of black people in a sign of repentance. And literally my first thought, I was scrolling and I go, I don't know about that. So yeah, in like that sense, I don't know, that's a little odd to me, and some people would disagree with me, because it's like, I do believe that every knee shall bow before Christ, because I'm not about to bow to another sinful human being.
Yeah.
But I get the posture, and I thought this was like going the route of like with the Pledge of Allegiance, kneeling, all that. But this is, yeah, I don't necessarily see the like bowing before people, if I'm being honest. So that was just funny that you brought that up, because I literally wrestled with that this morning. It was just, I don't know.
You know, so I don't see it as theological as that. So I don't necessarily recommend it, but I don't know like what a person is doing in their heart, like what the Spirit's doing in people's hearts, right? So for some people, there may be a genuine moment of humility and a genuine conviction. And the way that they express that is by kneeling. And I don't want to condemn that in and of itself, the action. I'm not recommending, I don't think white people need to kneel to do that. I think it's what I said already about recognizing we've inherited this and sort of that reality from 2 Kings 22. But I don't want to condemn it either, because I don't know, you know, in John 3, Jesus makes this point when he's talking to Nicodemus, and he says, you know, you see the wind and you don't know where it's going or what direction it's coming from, but you see its impact and you know it's real. And he said, so it is with those filled with the Spirit of God, right? This is John 3. So the Spirit is going to move us in different ways and do different things. And I don't want to make kneeling a biblical thing that I'm going to have a problem with. I know that every knee will bow to Christ. We get that. But I think it's the same thing as like at a football game, I stand up and I put my hand over the thing, and you know, that's I'm not required to do that either biblically, but it's something I do as a sign of respect for the nation. And so I don't want to condemn someone if it's a genuine, man, I'm grieved over this happening, and I'm going to kneel because it's not sinful to do so. It's not necessarily righteous either, but at least it communicates to this person, I'm grieving, and I'm expressing a degree of sorrow. I don't want to, there needs to be a place for that. Now, is it recommended? Should you have to do that in order to? I don't think so. And I think if you feel that, if you're kneeling because you feel like you have to, then that's what James said, whatever does not proceed from faith, for him that is sin. That's fear of man. I don't think anyone should kneel because they have to. It's not required biblically, but I want to leave room for people to actually let the Spirit work and grieve them, and they may say, you know, I'm kneeling not because, oh, it's idolatry, I worship this person, but because I'm really grieving over this, and this is something that I feel like I can do in good conscience to demonstrate that I feel you and I feel your pain.
Yeah.
That actually makes a whole lot of sense.
There's definitely different kinds of kneeling, because the video of the guy at the cop that didn't want to kneel, then somebody made a joke about, did you kneel when you proposed to your wife? And then of course other people were like, there's different kinds of kneeling. There's like deference, like I defer to you, I love you so much that I'm willing to submit myself in this posture. And then there's of course the worship kind of kneeling. So it's an interesting conversation. I think we probably do need to bring this to a close, because we're going to get dangerously close to stepping on the heels of on the toes of Friday's conversation. But guys, thank you so much for coming and doing this and just taking time and being another voice to add to this essential conversation. So
thanks for having me. Anytime.
Absolutely.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, I'm going to end the recording. If anybody has any final thoughts, feel free to say it.
I do have one final thought.
Yeah.
But just like what Curt was saying, I think that's really something that I think we should all think about, is that how are you going to fight for peace when you don't know the God of peace? And how are you going to fight for justice when you don't even know the God of justice? So It's everyone is made in the image of God, yes, but not everyone possesses the Spirit of God. And that's
Good distinction.
that I think is people really need to come to terms with. Sorry, I don't know. I just felt like that needed to be said.
No, I think that's great. And I didn't stop recording because I knew you were going to say something wise.
Thank you.
So yeah. Okay. All right. Whoops. I did the wrong thing. I'm so sorry.
It's a good picture.
Yeah, I know. I need to. Well, it'll stop recording when we end. Does anybody have any final thoughts they want to say before we just end the meeting? Curt, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
I'm realizing we might need to have you on here again.
I'd love to. Just let me know.
Okay.
Yeah, you man.
All right. See you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.